Each week, True Crime Files takes a new case and examines it from the beginning, the investigative stage of it, the jury trial, and the conclusion. Now, today we're going to be looking at one of what I call unusual suspect cases. Throughout my career, I've had a number of cases where the suspect is right under our nose and we don't see him or recognize him. So I think you're going to find this one fascinating. Remember, we get a new True Crime Files episode every Friday at 3 o'clock. So subscribe so you know exactly when it comes out. So let's get into the facts of our case, Unusual Suspect. Case about today. Taking back what's mine. The Stephanie Lazarus case. All right. The usual suspects make it easy to solve cases, but when it's the unusual suspects who you wouldn't suspect, and sometimes they're right under your nose. And the case we're going to be talking about today is the unusual suspect. Now, we're going to be talking about Van Nuys, California. It's part of the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles, and a lot of apartments out there, and I direct your attention to February 24th, 1986. This is an apartment complex, very nice, well-maintained, very quiet area, a wonderful place to rent an apartment. And on that date, Sherry Rasmussen, she didn't feel well, and she wasn't going to go to work. And she told her husband, I think I'll stay home today. And he said, okay, well, I'll go to work. And he left, most likely it was about 6:30, 6:45. So she's home alone upstairs resting. And it may have been almost 10 o'clock, maybe a little, it was after 9:30. She heard some noises, some sounds. She couldn't figure out what it was. So she kind of got up from bed to get her security control, which she had left downstairs. So all of a sudden, a person attacks her, and she starts fighting back, and the person bites her arm, her forearm, and she lets go, and that person grabs something, hits her over the head, and knocks her out and dazes her. She falls down, and she's downstairs by this time, and the person then takes out a gun and shoots her. Shoots her 3 times with this gun against a pillow, and she is fatally wounded. She falls dead and is in the kitchen area of the apartment. Now her husband, John, came home, maybe about 5:30, 5:45, and when he came in, he was surprised. He saw stereo equipment next to the front door, and the apartment seemed to be ransacked. Drawers out, things all over the place. He can't figure out what's going on. So he looks around and he finds Sherry, and she's dead. And he calls 911, and they come out. Can't revive her. She definitely is dead. So when the detectives arrive, they're checking things out, and at the look of the stereo equipment, the way the house was ransacked, they figured it was a burglar. Some burglar or group of burglars had broken into the house, and somehow had gone bad. Sherry had been confronted by them and been shot by them. So that was the opinion of the detectives. Anyway, who is Sherry Rasmussen? Well, interesting person. She was the director of nursing at Glendale Adventist Hospital. And she was only, I think, 27 years old, but bright, very personable, well organized. Everybody liked her. And the hospital was so thrilled to have her head of nursing. So that is what she did. Now, she had met John, but before that, she had gone to Loma Linda University School of Nursing, where she got her degree. At the same time, John had gone to UCLA and gotten his engineering degree there. So that was kind of the background of this couple. At first, back in 1984, they dated for more than a year, maybe a year and a half. A lovely couple. Everybody was always impressed how attractive as well as how personable they were. Now, it didn't take long until November 1986. They decided to get married, and it was a very large wedding. So many people from the hospital came to the wedding, as well as friends of John's from his engineering. Well, the case involving Sherry's death didn't go anywhere. There were no additional clues, no leads, and eventually, after a year or two, the file was put in the cold case files. There it stayed for many, many years, from 1986 to 2007. And it wasn't until 2001 that LAPD decided to take the cold cases and take another look at them. And they asked all the divisions to send their reports down to Parker Center, the downtown headquarters for LAPD, and they would have a criminalist check it out to see if there's any thing that could be done about those old homicide cases, to see, is there some biological evidence there? Meaning, now that there's DNA, could something be tested now that wasn't available back then? Now, where is Sherry's evidence in her case? Now, Jennifer checks and sees that everything had been checked out. All the evidence from the coroner's office, as well as from the LAPD evidence locker, some detective had checked it out, and it was missing. It was gone. So she checked over the inventory list. She noticed that there was a bite mark, and there was no indication that a bite mark, swabs, or anything had been turned over. So she is asking the coroner's office, where's the bite mark, the swabs? And, the coroner's office couldn't answer. They said, well, we have the number here, we ran the number, and everything had been turned over at the time to that so-called detective that had picked it all up. So she said, well, can you check? Can you check? And they did. The coroner's office, they had a group that checked out the freezer. It's a huge freezer. It's a walk-in freezer. And they checked all through. And way back in the back, they found an envelope. And the number had disintegrated. It had crumbled. It had fallen off because it's like 18 years old. But the name, they saw it said Rasmussen. So now they knew this is it. And when they open it, there it is. The bite mark swabs are in that test tube. Wow. They are found. So immediately, Jennifer takes them, sends them to the crime lab to have it analyzed to see if there's enough DNA there that they can obtain from those swabs. Well, they take about a week or two for them to test it, and then she got the results back. And then she had the results put through the DNA database to see if it was connected to anyone that who was in the database. There were no matches. No matches at all. Very disappointing after all that work that they had gone through. But she noticed on the report, it said the bite mark was from a female. Whoa. She starts thinking about, wait, it said burglary. That's very unusual for a burglar to be a female. But anyway, she didn't know what to do with it, so she had everything sent back to Van Nuys. So it went back to Detective Natal, and he had a number of these cold cases that he was assigned to work on whenever he had extra time. But he had a full load of homicide detectives, so that's what he was working on. He took this Sherry Rasmussen case, put it on the side of his desk there, and it stayed there for yeah, most likely, 4 years at least. And then when he had time one day, he started reading the reports. He went through all the reports in there, and he came across something that said, John Rudin, victim possibly received threatening phone calls at work. Wow. He's thinking, well, wait, this wouldn't be a burglar. Why didn't they pursue that about who was making these threats to his wife, Sherry, at work? So he continues to look in there, and then later, about, maybe a year and a half later, November of 1987, there was a statement in there that said, John Rudin called, verified that Stephanie Lazarus, P.O., was former girlfriend. Well, wait, what does all that mean? Now, Detective Nuttall doesn't know. What does P.O. mean? Well, he didn't know for certain, but he thought, well, okay, let me talk to John Rudin. So he got on the phone, was able to get in contact with him, and he said, well, yeah, that P.O. means police officer. Stephanie Lazarus was an LAPD officer I used to date. And he continues to talk and mention that Sherry's dad had always made the comment that he thought that the suspect was a police officer. And so the detective Patel is listening to all that, and then he finds in the report that Sherry's father, Mr. Rasmussen, had said that Sherry, before her death, had sat down and talked with him and said, you know, there's a crazy-eyed police lady who keeps threatening me. And he didn't know the name of that person because he had never heard of it. So now Detective McNutt has a name, runs it through the LAPD database, finds out there is a Stephanie Lazarus who was a police officer. She had gone to the academy at LAPD, graduated, and become a patrol officer, and worked many of the different divisions in southern Los Angeles. But a very interesting career. She had been a detective. She had handled just about all the different positions at LAPD, and she was married to an LAPD officer and had an adopted daughter. So that was Stephanie Lazarus. Detective Mattel didn't know her, hadn't worked with her, but then he found out that she was assigned to the art fraud detail, which is a real nice assignment. They're headquartered downtown in Parker Center, and it's a cushy job because they come in contact with the rich and famous of West LA, the Beverly Hills crowd, people complaining about art fraud or theft of fraud. So that was where she worked. Now, with all this information, you know, they wanted to run that DNA that they had, and they didn't have any DNA on Stephanie Lazarus, since police officers don't have to give DNA. So how are they going to find and get a sample of DNA? So they start a surveillance of Stephanie. And on one of her days off, she went to Costco with her daughter, and they got their items that they needed to get in Costco. And then they went to the food court, and they had some pizza and a soft drink. And they sat down there, had their thing, and when Stephanie got finished, she took that cup, that soft drink, and she dropped it in the trash container. So as soon as she walked out of Costco with her daughter, the detective swooped in on that trash container, picked up that cup and the straw, and immediately took it over to the crime lab to have them analyze it to see if they could get any DNA off of it. And that's what the crime lab did. So now what they had was the bite mark with the swabs there had been tested. There was DNA. We know that was the killer's DNA on the swab there. And now we have Stephanie Lazarus, the police officer's DNA. We combine them, and they're the same. They're the same. So now we know that the killer was Stephanie Lazarus, the police officer. Okay, what really happened? What really happened between the two of them? Both women were in love with the same man, that John. And what had happened was that John had dated Stephanie for, more than a year. They had gone to UCLA together, and they were in a dorm. It was called Dykster Hall. And they were in the same dorm area on the same floor, and they got up a relationship, and they stayed close friends. They dated for more than a year, a couple of years, and then even after they both graduated. So things were, going okay, dating off and on. And then John met Sherry. Sherry was bubbly, delightful personality, very attractive. And I guess you could say it was like a love triangle. Stephanie really liked John. Sherry was impressed with John, but John was very impressed with Sherry. And they got engaged, as I had stated earlier. And that left Stephanie out of the triangle. Then they were going to get married, Sherry and John. And Stephanie calls up John, hey, can you come over? Can you come over and see me? I really feel bad about our relationship, and why did it fall apart? And maybe you can explain to me what went wrong. I'd just like to know. John, okay. He decided to go over to Stephanie's place, and they, had a drink or two, and they talked. And she says, I really would like a last night stand with you having sex. We had such good sex. And John, thinks about it. Well, okay. So they have sexual relations. Now, most likely it was about 2 days later that Stephanie goes over to Sherry's hospital, goes into Sherry's office, and, in a very loud voice, explains that she had just had sex with Sherry's fiancé, John. And then she shouts out the words, "If I can't have John, then no one will." Wow, what a confrontation. Well, what is Sherry going to do about that with John? Well, she forgave him, and the marriage went on. They had their wedding. So they lived happily ever after, even by getting that information that wasn't too good for Sherry's sake. Now, what happened with Stephanie continued to just couldn't get over the fact, and she would go over to Sherry's hospital and go in there and berate her in front of everybody else, even after they were married. So what was it? Why couldn't she just let go? But it just seemed like the happiness of Sherry and John was just too much for Stephanie. And she tried to think of a way, how do I get rid of Sherry? What do I need to do to get rid of her, get her out of the picture? And what really happened, to go through it again, we've already talked about February 24th, 1986, and Stephanie goes over to Sherry's, and Sherry is upstairs in the bedroom, not feeling real well, and she has a confrontation with her in the bedroom upstairs, and there's a fight. They fight going down the stairs, and somehow Sherry got the upper hand, got Stephanie in a headlock, and was doing quite well. Then all of a sudden, she bites the forearm, and that's where the bite mark comes in. And for somehow That dazed Sherry, she comes, and Stephanie grabbed a vase, hit Stephanie over the head, and she fell down. And then she pulls out the gun and she shoots her 3 times, and fatally shot her 3 times. So that's how it really happened between the two of them. And to cover it up so it didn't look like Stephanie was involved in it, she got all the stereo equipment, the speakers, she ransacked the apartment to make it look like a burglary. She knew what needed to be done because she had handled many burglary investigations in her career with LAPD. Then she opens the garage and she steals Sherry's car and parks it about, I don't know, maybe a mile, maybe a mile and a half away from the apartment complex. And she leaves the key in it, hoping that somebody will steal the car. So the only thing that apartment was the marriage license. She stole the marriage license between Sherry and John. Now, she wanted to cover her tracks about the gun that she'd used, so she claimed that her gym bag had been stolen with the revolver in it. So she made a report with Santa Monica Police Department, the stolen gun, and most likely the gun ended up in the Pacific Ocean somewhere, but was never ever found. But then to replace it, she went back to the academy. There's a gun store there, and she purchased another .38, exactly the same type as she had before. It was the same type that was used to shoot Sherry. Now, I want to direct your attention to June 5th, 2009, regarding an interview with Stephanie by the LAPD detectives, Detective Jaramillo and Detective Stearns. They had asked Stephanie, it was early in the morning, and they said, Stephanie, can you help us out? We have what we think is a suspect involved in some art fraud. Could you help us out? Now, I was told about this. I knew this was going to go down, and we just didn't know if this was going to work out. So in the DA's office, we were alerted to the fact that they were going to try this interview thing, but the concern was she's got a gun. We don't want her to take that gun and shoot anybody or shoot herself. So what they did was they said, we've got the person down in the jail. Come on down to the jail with us, and we'll talk to this art suspect maybe. And she does. She goes down there with them, and of course, when a police officer goes into the jail, they have to take their service revolvers or automatic and put it in a locker. So she did. She took her weapon out, put it in a locker, and sealed it up. And then she walked into the interview room down in the jail. And there, Detective Jaramillo starts asking her questions, a little bit about this art fraud, but then switched the subject to, did you know a John Reardon? And it kind of came as a surprise to Stephanie, but she didn't want to show any surprise on it. She said, oh yes, I knew a John Reardon. And then he followed up, did you have some type of confrontation with his wife? And her response, I don't remember his wife. No, nothing about that. I don't know what you're talking about. And then further on in the conversation, it went on for maybe an hour, hour and a half. If we asked you for DNA swab, would you be willing to give one? And this was where Stephanie starts thinking, whoops, maybe I've gone too far on this. And her response is, well, maybe, because now I'm thinking I'm probably going to need to talk to a lawyer. And then she says about her working as a detective, I've been doing this a long time. Okay, and now it all sounds like you're trying to pin something on me. I got that sense. And then she followed that up by saying, you're starting to make me feel uncomfortable. Do I need an attorney? And Jaramillo says, oh, you're not under arrest. You're free to go at any time. And with that, Stephanie, pushes her chair back, stands up, and says, well, okay, I've got other work to do. I've got to leave now. And she does. She starts walking out of the jail, and she gets to the gate there, and two other detectives step up to her, and they arrest her. They arrest her for the murder of Sherry Rasmussen. And this is the booking photo of Stephanie. So she is arrested for it, and of course the headlines of the newspaper the following day was, veteran LAPD detective arrested in 86 slaying. So the case went on for a long time. There were many things that delayed the case. And I did some work on it at the very beginning, but it just took too long. I couldn't stay with it. But there was another sample of DNA that they were able to get, and we kept waiting to see what the judge's ruling would be as to whether we would get the bite mark in as evidence. And eventually he ruled that it could come in, so now we had a very strong case. Now we had the DNA evidence that we were able to use now from the bite mark, and the motive, showing that she had gone over, berated Sherry at the hospital, and that the marriage license was stolen, as well as the gun report from Santa Monica Police Department. So that was kind of the evidence by the prosecution, but as far as the evidence by the defense, they concentrated on other burglaries in the area, that there was burglars that are breaking into different apartments in the Van Nuys area. And then they attacked the chain of custody on the bite mark vial with the swabs in it, claiming that it was mislabeled and had been in the freezer in the coroner's office for 18 years. Well, anyway, the case was tried in the criminal courts building downtown, and it took a couple of weeks, and Stephanie was found guilty of first-degree murder, and the judge sentenced her to 27 years to life. And as to where they are today, well, Detective Lazarus is an inmate at state prison, the women's state prison, and Sherry is buried. This is her tombstone. So that's where the two of them are today. Now, when you look at their pictures and you wonder, jealousy can destroy lives, and that is so true. How could that happen? We have two women who love the same man, John, and their love for John became deadly. Jealousy definitely can destroy lives. Now, to continue on this, there was quite a bit of controversy about LAPD. And Chief Beck, as well as Chief Bratton, had to answer a lot of questions. Why the delay? All those years, over 20-year delay. Were they trying to protect one of their own? Or, who knows? There's a picture of Chief Bratton and Stephanie at a social event. But the police said, look, everything that we had at the time, it looked like a burglary, with all the stereo equipment and the speakers lined up at the front door. The car was stolen. Yes, we thought it was a burglary. We didn't have DNA back then in 1986, but when we found out about the bite mark and we had it analyzed, we vigorously pursued the case, and we were able to make a case against Stephanie. So that was their explanation on it. Well, back to how we started about the usual suspects are easier to find and convict, but it's the unusual suspects that are hard to spot. The Stephanie Lazarus case is a perfect example when the detectives put their mind to it, these old cold cases, sometimes they can solve them. I wrote a book, Tenacity Solve Murder, and it's another example of when these detectives took every single clue, every tip they had, and they pursued it, and they were able to get the murderer. Well, hopefully you enjoyed this True Crime Files podcast, and you'll join us again for another one by Ronald E. Bowers. See you then.